Alien princess begs, human share my bed tonight. No weapons were allowed inside its core chambers, and every species that entered agreed to follow the same rules. Humans had arrived only a few years ago on the galactic stage, but already their presence made many aliens uneasy. They were not the strongest. They were not the oldest, yet they had survived a harsh world, endless conflicts, and disasters that would have ended most civilizations. That history followed them like a quiet shadow. Commander Elias Rowan stood near the observation window, hands behind his back. He was not tall by human standards, but his posture was calm and alert. His eyes moved slowly, always watching. Humans had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. Across the chamber, the Virelian delegation entered in a slow, careful line. They were tall, slender beings with pale, glass-like skin that shimmered faintly under the station lights. Their long eyes reflected colors humans could barely see. At the center walked Princess Scifi of Virel, her royal markings glowing softly along her neck and arms. She was young by her people's standards, too young to be leading a delegation during a crisis. But the crisis had taken many lives already. Scifi had been taught since childhood that humans were dangerous, unstable, too emotional, too unpredictable. Yet when her eyes met Elias S. across the room, she felt something she did not expect. Stillness. The talks began formally. Trade routes, defense concerns, quiet words spoken with careful distance, but beneath every sentence was fear. The Virelian Empire was facing internal collapse. A faction within their ruling council had turned against the throne. Ships had vanished. Communication lines were failing. Scifi sat silently while elders spoke for her. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers slightly trembling. Then the lights flickered, for less than a second, but enough. Every human in the room shifted at once, not panicked, not loud, just ready. Elias stepped half a pace closer to the princess without realizing it. His body reacted before his mind. The lights stabilized. Station control apologized. A minor power fluctuation, they said, but Scifi had seen the human reaction. Her own guards had frozen. Her advisors had stiffened in fear. Only the humans had moved smoothly like they expected problems to happen. The meeting ended early. That night, Scifi could not rest. Her private chamber felt too large, too quiet. The walls hummed softly, but the sound only reminded her of how fragile safety truly was. Her thoughts returned again and again to the flicker of lights and the human commander's calm presence. Virelian tradition was old, older than their empire. When danger came from within, when betrayal lurked close, a royal could perform the vigil request, asking someone outside their bloodline to share a resting space. Not for comfort, not for closeness, but to confirm trust when fear clouded judgment. It was a sacred act, one never made lightly. Scifi rose from her resting platform and activated her communicator. "I request a private audience," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her chest. "With the human commander." Elias was reviewing security reports when the request arrived. He frowned slightly. A private request from an alien princess, outside protocol, but something about the message felt careful, not demanding, not political. He accepted. When Scifi entered his quarters, she stood with her hands folded, eyes lowered in respect. The soft glow of her markings was dimmer now, uncertain. "Commander Rowan," she said, "thank you for meeting me." "You can call me Elias," he replied gently. "And you don't need to thank me. How can I help?" She hesitated. For the first time in her life, words felt heavy. "My people are in danger," she said finally. "Not from outside enemies, from ourselves." Elias nodded. He did not interrupt. "In my culture," she continued, "when trust is broken within the throne, the ruler may ask an outsider to share their resting space during the night of uncertainty." Elias blinked once. "I understand how that might sound to a human," she said quickly, her markings brightening with embarrassment. "It is not what your kind may imagine. It is symbolic, to stay awake, to guard each other's presence, to prove intent." Silence stretched between them. Elias considered the request carefully. He thought of his training, his duty, his people's reputation. Then he remembered the flickering lights, the fear in the room, the way Scifi had watched instead of panicking. "If this helps prevent harm," he said at last, "then I'll do it." Scifi's eyes widened slightly. "You accept without conditions?" He gave a small, human smile. "You asked honestly, that matters." The arrangement was made quietly, no announcements. No guards informed beyond the minimum required for station security. That night, Elias sat in a simple chair near Selira's resting platform. The lights were dim. The room was silent except for the soft hum of life support. He did not sleep. Neither did she. Time passed slowly. Minutes stretched into hours. At one point, Selira spoke again. "Why are humans so calm in danger?" she asked softly. Elias did not answer right away. "Because panic never helped us survive," he said finally. "Fear is loud, calm lets you hear what matters." She considered that. "My people avoid fear," she said. "We hide from it." "That works," Elias replied, "until fear finds you anyway." Suddenly, an alarm chirped, low priority but real. Elias was on his feet instantly, checking the room, the door, the station channel. His movements were smooth, controlled. It turned out to be a sensor error, nothing more. But Selira watched every second. She realized then what made humans different. They did not pretend danger was rare. They planned for it. As the station's artificial dawn cycle began, soft light filled the chamber. Selira's markings glowed steadily now, no longer flickering. The vigil was complete. She rose and bowed deeply. "My life was safe tonight," she said, "and so was my trust." Elias returned the gesture in his own way, a respectful nod. Neither of them knew it yet, but a single quiet night had just shifted the future of the galaxy. The sun of the artificial dawn filled Princess Selira's chamber with soft light. Her eyes traced the patterns on the walls, the shadows of the small plants in the corner, and the quiet hum of the station. The events of the previous night still lingered in her mind. She had survived the vigil request. A human had stayed awake beside her, alert, calm, and patient. And for the first time in her life, she understood something about humans she had never expected. Elias Rowan had remained calm through every flicker of danger, every alarm, every possible threat. And yet it was not just calmness that impressed her. It was the way he watched, the way he listened. He was present in the moment, fully aware of everything around him, yet not afraid. Selira rose from her resting platform and moved to the small window overlooking the docking bay. Ships of every size and shape glimmered in the morning light, some docking, others preparing for departure. She had often watched the stars, wondering if humans were as unpredictable as her advisors had said. But now she saw them differently. Elias entered silently, carrying 2 cups of hot liquid. On his world, humans called it coffee. Its aroma filled the room, rich and warm, cutting through the sterile air of the station. He handed her a cup, and she accepted it cautiously, not used to the ritual of sharing quiet moments with another being outside her species. "You sleep well?" Elias asked, settling into his chair. Selira took a sip, letting the warmth calm her. "I did not sleep much. My mind kept returning to last night." She paused. "And to you, you never faltered." Elias shrugged lightly. "I do not claim to be fearless, I just prepare for things that might happen. Panic never solves anything." She studied him. "Your people, are you always like this?" "Calm in danger?" He shook his head. "No, we are afraid, every human is, but we learn to control it, to see the problem clearly before it grows bigger. It is not courage without fear, it is choosing action instead of panic." Selira's markings flickered softly in thought. She had never heard such a clear distinction between fear and action. In her culture, fear was hidden or denied. People who panicked were considered weak. But humans faced fear and still remained steady. "Is it strange for you to stay awake all night for another being?" she asked. Elias smiled faintly. "Not strange, duty, trust, and sometimes curiosity." "Curiosity," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "I wanted to understand why you asked me to stay. And I think I understand now." He leaned back slightly. "You did not ask me for comfort, you asked for presence, safety, proof of trust." Selira nodded slowly. "Yes, in my culture, when a ruler's safety is threatened from within, the vigil request is made. It is symbolic. But the act shows loyalty. It shows that someone will stay awake when all others may fail." Elias set his cup down and regarded her. "It also shows courage, not just yours, but yours and mine together. You trusted me, and I stayed." A quiet moment passed. The soft hum of the station, the distant movements of crews and ships, and the warm light filled the room. Selira felt a strange calm herself. She realized that humans did not need formal rituals to display loyalty. Their actions, their presence, their patience, all of it was proof enough. "I did not expect you to accept so easily," she admitted. "My advisors would have called it madness." He shrugged. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective. If you ask me honestly, then I act honestly. That is how humans survive." Lyra studied him closely. There was no arrogance in his words, no attempt to impress, only honesty, only steadiness. She wondered why no one in her council had taught her the same lesson. Perhaps it was because they could not. Perhaps it was because humans did not fit their expectations. The morning continued quietly. For hours, Lyra and Elias spoke, not as ruler and guest, but as two beings sharing thoughts. She told him stories of her childhood, of the lessons in loyalty and observation, of the expectations placed upon her shoulders as a young princess. He listened carefully, occasionally nodding, never interrupting. "You were always taught to watch," Elias said finally. "To see threats before they arrive, but did anyone teach you to see what is true in others?" She shook her head. "No, we are trained to see danger, to see betrayal, but we rarely see the courage of those outside our culture. And sometimes the most dangerous thing is assuming others are weak." Elias leaned forward. "Humans are often underestimated for that reason. People expect us to panic or fail, but we endure, we adapt, we observe, and sometimes we surprise." Lyra considered this. "I saw it last night, not because you were stronger than my guards, but because you remained present when fear gripped everyone else. You were calm, you noticed everything, you acted when it was needed. That is rare." "It is what we learn," he said. "On Earth we have storms, earthquakes, enemies, disasters. We have lost many. We have survived many. We do not panic because the next step matters more than the fear we feel." She sipped her coffee again, thinking, perhaps this was what her council could not see. Perhaps this was what her people could not understand. Humans were not the strongest, not the oldest, not the most powerful, but in a moment of chaos they were steady, reliable, present. Later, the conversation turned to her people's internal threat. A faction within her council had turned against her. Ships had disappeared mysteriously. Communications had been jammed. She explained the history of betrayal in her court, of ancient political games where rulers were deposed without warning. Elias listened and then asked a simple question. "Have you asked for help before?" She shook her head. "No, outsiders are seen as weak, as unreliable. Only our own blood, our own kind can be trusted. But I was desperate. I did not know who I could trust." "That is why I asked you." His expression softened. "Trust is not given because someone is blood. Trust is earned by action, and last night you saw what action can mean." The princess remained quiet. For the first time, she realized that humans measured trust differently. Not by words, by rituals, or by titles, by presence, by their willingness to stand when others faltered, by their endurance. A small alarm chirped in the corner, a low signal from the docking bay. Elias rose calmly and checked the readouts. Nothing dangerous, just a routine system check. But the princess followed him, watching. She noticed the same calm readiness that had impressed her the night before. No fear, only awareness. "You never jump to conclusions," she observed. "Jumping to conclusions is a mistake," he said simply. "If we act without seeing the truth, we fail. If we act with patience, we survive." Hours passed. The sun of the artificial station climbed higher. Crew members moved about, ships prepared for departure, and distant voices echoed through the halls. Yet in her chamber, Lyra felt a strange peace. The human beside her was not a hero. He had not displayed force or power. He had only been present, calm, and attentive. It was enough. By the afternoon, she realized she could trust him, not because he was human, not because of his rank, but because he had acted when it mattered most. She understood then why her culture's ritual existed. Presence was trust, vigilance was loyalty. And humans, in their own way, had shown both without any ceremony. "Elias," she said quietly, "I do not know what will happen next, but last night I saw something important, something I cannot explain to my council, but you understand." He nodded. "I understand more than you think. Trust is a bridge, Lyra. It can cross worlds if it is built carefully." She considered that, sipping the last of her coffee. Perhaps this was a lesson she would take to her throne. Perhaps this was a lesson her people needed. Humans were not perfect. They were not gods, but they endured. They observed. They acted. And they did not falter when fear demanded it. The hours passed, and soon the station prepared for evening. Lyra returned to her resting platform, but her mind was not restless this time. Elias remained near, not as a guard, not as a stranger, but as a silent witness to a quiet truth. Humans stood ready when others fell apart. Humans endured. Humans could be trusted not because they promised, but because they acted. And in that simple, quiet moment, Lyra realized that she had learned more than any book or advisor could teach her. She had learned what it meant to rely on another being without fear. She had learned that humans were not unpredictable monsters. They were steady anchors in a sea of uncertainty. The night would come again, the threat would not disappear. But for the first time, Princess Celira did not fear the night. She had seen the truth, and she had human beside her. The calm of Haven Ring Station did not last. News came swiftly, carried on encrypted channels and whispered through the corridors by anxious staff. A faction within the Viorlian Council, the very faction that had caused the princesses fear the night before, was making its move. Ships had vanished in the nearby systems. Messages from distant colonies reported strange attacks, not from foreign enemies, but from their own people. Princess Celira stood in her observation chamber, staring at the blinking lights of the station's communication array. She had called for Elias Rowan immediately. The human commander arrived within minutes, calm as ever, though his sharp eyes reflected the urgency of the moment. "They've begun," she said quietly. "The faction, they are striking quickly. We don't know the full extent yet." Elias nodded. "We need to prioritize safety. Information first, reaction second. Panic never helps." The princess's hands trembled slightly. She had spent her life learning the rules of diplomacy, the strategies of negotiation, and the power of ceremony. But now, rules and ceremony were useless. Her people were being attacked from within, and she realized that the calm presence of one human might be the only thing between her and disaster. The station's command room became their base of operations. Holographic screens displayed movement across the nearby systems. Dozens of Viorlian ships were either missing or unresponsive. Reports of sabotage, data breaches, and mechanical failures piled up faster than anyone could track. "Your people," Celira said quietly to Elias. "You do not panic when confronted by chaos." "How?" He stepped to one of the screens, scanning the lines of data carefully. "We focus on what we can control, not what we cannot. Fear wastes energy, preparation saves it." Celira watched him work. Every movement was precise, every decision deliberate. He did not rush. He did not second-guess. He simply assessed, prioritized, and acted. Hours passed. The first wave of attacks reached the neutral stations at the edge of Viorlian space. Ships were disabled, supply lines cut, and communication systems jammed. Alien leaders across the galaxy reacted with panic. Councils convened, guards were deployed, and alliances strained. But in Celira's chamber, and in the human's calm presence, a different mood prevailed. "Alert the fleet," Elias said finally. "But do not give them information we cannot verify. Let them prepare quietly. Panic spreads faster than weapons." Celira blinked. "You do not fear for the lives of the fleet?" "Of course I do," he replied. "But fear will not protect them. Strategy will." The princess realized that this was the first time she had seen someone prioritize logic over emotion so naturally. Her own advisors would have sent armies without information, panicked at every signal, and mistrusted every ally. Humans did not act on fear. They acted on understanding. As the first Viorlian ships were sabotaged, Celira made a decision. She would go to the docking bay herself to oversee the emergency, and Elias would accompany her, not as a guard but as a partner in the crisis. The docking bay was chaotic. Crews rushed to repair damaged systems. Engineers and pilots shouted over the clanging of metal and the hiss of venting air. Celira felt the old familiar tension rising, but Elias moved calmly beside her, observing, directing, and guiding. "Do not interfere with their work unless necessary," he advised softly. "They know their systems, we only coordinate." Hours turned into an endless sequence of minor disasters. Ships were repaired, communications restored, sabotage was detected and contained. And through it all, the human's presence was steady, guiding without dominating, listening without ignoring. Word of their success began to spread. Low-ranking officials observed how Elias calmly assessed each problem. He did not command with authority. He commanded with competence. When the faction leaders realized that the princess had not only survived the night, but now operated efficiently under human guidance, their strategy faltered. They had counted on fear, confusion, and internal chaos. Instead, they faced a ruler who remained clear-headed and a human who taught others how to remain the same. By evening, the first faction attacks were neutralized. Celira gathered her council and briefed them on the results. She explained how humans measured trust by action, not by ceremony or bloodline. How calm observation, steady presence, and careful decision-making could prevent disaster. Some council members were reluctant to accept it. Pride and tradition ran deep in their veins. But even they could not ignore the evidence. Their ships were saved, communication lines restored, no major lives were lost. Selyra looked at Elias. He had not sought recognition. He had not demanded reward. He had simply acted as humans always did, focused, calm, and present. The night brought reflection. Selyra returned to her chamber, alone now, though the hum of the station seemed louder than ever. She thought of the events of the last 2 days. The vigil request had begun as a simple tradition, a symbolic act. But it had shown something far more important. Humans were not warriors who fought with force alone. They were strategists, thinkers, and steady companions. In the face of chaos, they remained awake when others would falter. They acted not out of pride or ambition, but out of responsibility. Selyra realized that the lesson was larger than the immediate crisis. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. Many species believed humans to be unpredictable, weak, or naive. But the true strength of humanity was not in their technology, size, or weapons. It was in their minds, their presence, and their endurance. She wrote a private message to her mother, the Queen. It was brief but clear. A human officer proved more capable in a single night than many of our best strategists. Observe, learn, and consider our alliances carefully. The next morning, reports arrived from colonies that had watched the chaos from afar. They had seen the princess act with calm authority. They had seen humans assisting without seeking glory, and the news began to change the perception of humanity quietly but steadily. Even rival factions paused to reconsider their assumptions. A few sent discreet envoys, seeking to understand the humans who could remain so composed under pressure. Selyra, however, remained cautious. She knew that trust had to be built carefully. She could not assume that all humans were alike, nor that all aliens would accept this lesson. But she also knew that she had witnessed a rare quality, a human's ability to endure, observe, and act under the heaviest pressure. In her chambers that night, she reflected on what she had learned. The vigil request had begun as a tradition meant to prove loyalty, but it had done something far more powerful. It had revealed the meaning of trust, calm, and presence in the face of danger. It had shown that humans, even when underestimated, could rise to meet challenges that others would fail to survive. Elias remained nearby, quietly monitoring station systems. He had not sought recognition. He did not need it, yet his presence had changed everything. Selyra realized that the true impact of that night would not be immediate. It would unfold over time, as her people observed, learned, and adapted. The lessons of patience, calm, and action over panic would spread. And humans, once thought unpredictable, would become silent examples of strength in a galaxy that had misjudged them. As sleep finally approached, Selyra's markings glowed faintly with a sense of hope. She understood that she had learned more in 2 nights than in all her years of formal education. Trust, endurance, calmness, and action, these were human strengths she would never forget. And as she drifted to rest, she felt a quiet certainty. The galaxy would soon notice. Humans would be seen in a new light, not as wild outsiders, not as naive or weak, but as steady companions capable of facing chaos when all else seemed lost. For the first time, she looked forward to what humanity could teach her people, and what her people might learn from humanity. The galaxy had begun to notice, not with warships or loud proclamations, but with quiet curiosity. Word of the events at Haven Ring spread through communications networks, trade channels, and diplomatic whispers. It was unusual. A young alien princess had survived internal betrayal, managed chaos, and restored calm, and she had done it with the help of a human. Princess Selyra could feel the shift in her people. Meetings that had once been dominated by fear and pride now carried an undercurrent of caution. Council members looked at her differently, realizing that the human she had trusted was more than a guest. He was a demonstration of a new kind of strength. Elias Rowan, for his part, remained calm as ever. He did not relish attention. Humans had learned that recognition was less important than results, but even he noticed the subtle change in tone during every meeting and briefing. Alien leaders spoke with restraint, waited longer before acting, and asked more questions rather than issuing orders. Selyra began her morning with a private discussion with Elias in her chambers. The sunlight of the station's artificial morning bathed the room in pale gold. "The council is watching me differently," she said. Her markings pulsed gently. They do not fully understand why, but they are cautious. Even those who opposed me are hesitant to speak against my decisions. Elias leaned against the wall. They saw action. They saw results. Humans do not need to intimidate or lecture. We act, and that is often more convincing than words. She nodded. I understand now. My people often measure strength by ceremony, tradition, or appearance, but what they saw in you is real. It cannot be faked. Presence, calm, observation, action. These are strengths they cannot ignore. The station alarms were quiet that day, a rare relief. Selira used the time to meet with younger officers, sharing lessons from the recent crisis. She noticed that her words carried more weight than before. They listened carefully, questioning less, observing more. She paused in one meeting, realizing something remarkable. Humans did not just survive danger, they taught others how to survive it. By example, by calm presence, by measured action. This was a lesson her culture had never formally taught. Across the galaxy, the ripple effect was even more noticeable. In distant colonies, commanders who had witnessed the humans' role began requesting advisors trained by humans. They did not seek warriors or weapons. They sought guidance, insight, and calm leadership. Humans had become, quietly but powerfully, symbols of resilience. A message arrived from one of Selira's distant governors. It read simply, the human officer demonstrated what our legends often forget. Observation, patience, and steady action are as powerful as fleets. We request he remain as advisor for our colony's training exercises. Selira smiled softly. She had never thought humans would be considered teachers of strategy. And yet, here they were, changing minds not through aggression, but through presence. Later, she gathered her council for a formal briefing. The topic was the ongoing threat from the rogue faction. Aliens who had doubted her leadership now waited quietly, watching how she acted. I will speak plainly, Selira began. Our people face challenges not from foreign enemies, but from within. Our strength is not just in our fleets or our traditions. It is in our ability to act wisely, to remain calm when chaos surrounds us, and to recognize strength in unexpected places. Eyes turned toward Elias, who stood quietly at the edge of the chamber. He offered no words, no commands, only a calm, measured presence. And in that silence, every alien present understood something remarkable. The human beside the princess embodied the lesson she spoke. By midday, subtle changes began to show in council decisions. Plans were revised to account for information rather than speculation. Officers were instructed to observe before acting. Discussions became longer but calmer. Decisions carried more weight because they were measured, not rushed. In her private moments, Selira reflected on what had happened. Humans were not invincible. They did not fight with the raw power of her people, but they endured. They observed. They acted only when necessary, and in doing so, they influenced entire societies without demanding recognition. She realized that the real shift was not just political, it was cultural. Her people would never again look at humans the same way. For centuries, aliens had judged others by appearances, traditions, and rituals. But humans defied expectation. They taught a quiet, undeniable truth. Presence and calm could be more powerful than pride and ceremony. Even the rogue faction began to notice. Messages intercepted from their communications suggested confusion and hesitation. They had expected chaos and panic. They had expected internal collapse. Instead, they faced coordination, calm, and unexpected resilience. Their attacks slowed, their plans faltered, and doubt began to creep into their minds. Selira's advisors whispered among themselves, recognizing that the human beside her had become more than an officer. He had become a standard by which strength would now be measured. That evening, the princess requested a quiet walk on the observation deck. Elias accompanied her, their silhouettes framed by the stars stretching endlessly beyond the station. The galaxy is watching, she said softly. Do you realize what you have done? He shook his head. I did not do anything extraordinary. I stayed present. I acted when it mattered. That is all humans do. She looked at him, her markings glowing faintly. No, you changed more than just events. You changed minds. You changed how people see strength. Not through force, but through action and calm. That is extraordinary. Elias smiled faintly. Perhaps, but the galaxy will forget soon enough. People often forget quiet lessons. They remember spectacle. Perhaps, she said, but the lesson remains, and I will not forget. My people will not forget. You have shown us a way to face chaos without losing control. That is a gift far greater than any weapon. The station quieted as night approached. Stars shimmered outside, countless points of light against the darkness. Lyra felt a sense of cautious hope. The crisis was not over. The rogue faction still existed. Challenges still lay ahead. But now she understood that humans offered more than survival. They offered perspective, steadiness, and strategy. Over the next several days, she began introducing subtle changes in her court. Officers who had once acted without observation were now encouraged to analyze and prepare. Younger leaders were taught the principle of presence and calm. And in every council meeting, the human officer remained nearby, guiding silently, influencing not by words but by example. Across the galaxy, colonies began reporting similar observations. Humans were requested not as soldiers but as advisors. Their presence was considered stabilizing. Alliances shifted quietly as leaders reconsidered the value of calm action over raw power. Lyra understood that she had witnessed a rare quality, the essence of human strength. It was not their weapons, their fleets, or their technology. It was their mind, their patience, and their endurance. And through her own vigil request, she had helped the galaxy see it for the first time. By the time the next artificial dawn cycle arrived, the cultural shift was unmistakable. Aliens who had once doubted the young princess now listened carefully. Decisions were slower, measured, and deliberate. Fear no longer dominated. Observation and presence guided action. And at the center of it all quietly stood a human, not seeking power, not seeking recognition, but standing calm, steady, and ready, teaching the galaxy a lesson that would echo far beyond Haven Ring. Princess Lyra reflected on the lesson with quiet pride. She had trusted an outsider when her people doubted, and in doing so she had discovered a strength her culture had never fully understood. Humans, she realized, were teachers of patience and calm. Their presence could prevent chaos. Their endurance could influence nations. Their quiet action could reshape the galaxy. The shift was not complete, but it had begun. And Lyra knew one thing clearly: humans would never be underestimated again. The galaxy had begun to change. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. The night of the vigil request, the night Elias Rowan had stayed awake beside Princess Lyra, was no longer just a private story. It had become a symbol, whispered among distant colonies, repeated in council halls, and shared between allies and rivals alike. Elias himself remained unaware of the ripple his actions had caused. He continued his duties with the same calm precision as always, but everywhere he went, eyes watched him differently. Aliens who had once dismissed humans as unpredictable now paused to observe. They studied the way he moved, the way he acted, the way he remained steady when chaos surrounded him. Princess Lyra stood on the observation deck of Haven Ring, looking out at the stars. She had grown since the night of the vigil. She had faced danger, guided her people, and witnessed firsthand what humans could offer. And she had learned that the true strength of humanity was not in weapons, fleets, or advanced technology. It was in presence, patience, and steady action. Elias joined her quietly, offering a small nod of greeting. She did not need words to explain the changes that had taken place. He had already been part of them, and the evidence was all around. "The galaxy is different now," Lyra said softly. Her markings glowed faintly under the station lights. Allies and rivals alike, they see humans differently. Elias considered the stars. "Perhaps, but change is slow. Recognition is rare. Many will still doubt until they experience it themselves." Lyra shook her head gently. "No, they have already seen it. Even those who opposed me, those who once tried to sabotage my authority, now listen carefully. They hesitate before acting rashly. They prepare, observe, and act only when necessary. That is your gift, Elias. Humans do not rely on fear to lead. They rely on presence." He gave a small, human smile. "Then the lesson is complete." "Not complete," she replied, "but enough to start a chain reaction, enough to show the galaxy that strength is not always about power. Sometimes it is about endurance, wisdom, and calm." As they spoke, a message arrived from a distant colony. The transmission was brief but significant. "We request that the human officer be sent to train our leadership team in observation, calm decision-making, and strategic planning." Lyra read the message aloud. "They want you to teach them how to remain calm under pressure, how to act when fear surrounds them." Elias shook his head. "I do not teach, I only act. What I do is simple. I do not panic. I observe. I choose my steps carefully. That is all humans do." "But that is enough," Lyra said firmly. Enough to change minds, enough to shift culture, enough to influence the galaxy. Over the next weeks, Elias traveled to several colonies with Selyra observing, advising, and quietly guiding. He did not command with authority. He did not demand recognition. He simply demonstrated calm, careful action. And wherever he went, alien leaders noticed. In one colony, a fleet commander struggled to manage a sudden system malfunction. Aliens panicked, equipment failed, and tension rose. Elias stepped in not with orders but with questions. What is the problem? What can you control? What matters most right now? Slowly, step by step, the commander regained control. Systems stabilized. Panic faded. The lesson had been learned not through force but through calm guidance. Word of these successes returned to Haven Ring. The princess's council began adopting new procedures. Decision-making became slower but wiser. Observation replaced assumption. Communication replaced speculation. And across the galaxy, humans were quietly gaining a reputation that no army could create. Humans as stabilizers, as anchors, as living examples of resilience. One evening, after a long day of briefings and strategy sessions, Selyra asked Elias to walk with her along the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the station, glittering like jewels. "You have changed more than the colonies," she said softly. "You have changed my people, my council, and even the rogue faction. They hesitate now, they second-guess, they observe before acting. That is your gift." Elias shook his head. "I did not do it for recognition. I only acted as humans do. That is all. Survival requires calm, careful action, and sometimes presence is enough to influence others." "Presence is enough," she repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, that is true, and yet the galaxy will remember this. Not as a battle, not as a war, but as a simple night, when one human showed what it means to remain steady when all others faltered." The station lights dimmed as the artificial evening cycle began. Selyra looked at Elias, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You have done more than you realize. You have not only saved lives, but you have changed how humans will be seen forever. You have proven that courage is not always loud, that power is not always physical, and that trust is strongest when it is earned through action." Elias smiled faintly. "Then the lesson continues," he said. "Every person who watches carefully, acts calmly, and endures will carry it forward." Selyra's markings glowed warmly in agreement. "Yes, and they will. Humans have shown the galaxy a new way to survive. A new way to lead, a new way to be trusted." The night grew deeper. Stars moved slowly across the sky outside. The galaxy was vast, filled with dangers, politics, and unknown threats. But for the first time, Princess Selyra felt confident that her people could face the future with a new understanding. They would not underestimate humans again. They would not rely solely on tradition or ceremony. They would learn from presence, calm, and endurance. The rogue faction remained a threat, but their actions became hesitant, cautious, and observant. They had learned indirectly that humans could not be rushed or provoked. Their plans faltered, not through battle, but through the subtle influence of calm action. And in every corner of the galaxy, whispers of the human officer's steady presence spread. Aliens debated, observed, and adapted. Humans were no longer outsiders. They were teachers of resilience, examples of endurance, and anchors in a chaotic universe. Back on Haven Ring, Selyra reflected on the journey. She remembered the first night, the simple vigil request, the quiet trust she had placed in one human beside her. She had not known then how much it would change the galaxy. She had only hoped that she would be safe. Now she realized the galaxy itself had become safer, not because of weapons, fleets, or force, but because of one human's calm presence and steady action. That night had become a legend, not in stories of battle, but in lessons of trust, endurance, and observation. Elias remained quietly at her side. He had not sought glory, he had not sought recognition. And yet, in the hearts and minds of countless beings across the stars, he had already achieved something extraordinary. "Do you ever wonder," Selyra asked, "if humans realize the power they have in ways they cannot see?" He looked at her, expression thoughtful. "Sometimes, but most of the time we just act, we do what we must, and the rest is up to the galaxy to notice." Selyra nodded. "And notice they did. You have shown the galaxy that calm, presence, and endurance are as powerful as fleets and weapons. You have changed how we think, act, and trust. You have changed the way the stars see humans." Elias smiled faintly. "Then the galaxy is in good hands. Not because humans are invincible, but because anyone can learn to endure, observe, and act when it matters. As the artificial night deepened, the stars outside Haven Ring shone brighter than ever. The galaxy was vast, filled with uncertainty, and yet filled with new understanding. A single night, a simple act of trust, had sparked a change that no one could have predicted. Princess Saylyra felt hope for the first time in years. The rogue faction could strike, alliances could shift, and dangers could emerge. But now her people had learned a lesson that would endure far longer than fear. They had learned to trust, to observe, and to act wisely. And humans, quiet, steady, and enduring, had become the anchor for that lesson. The night ended. Stars moved across the sky. The galaxy continued, ever-changing. But one thing had been set in motion forever. Humanity's true strength, their calm presence, their endurance, and their careful action would be recognized across the stars. And in the quiet of the observation deck, Princess Saylyra knew that one simple night, one human, and one act of trust had changed everything.